Hello and welcome to this video on the Morph 4 from Joranalogue. This is a dimensional modulation array. Let's check out what's to come. This demo video is sponsored by Joranalogue. I'll start by quoting the manual, which states, "Modulation is a core concept of modular synthesis, parameters changing over time, adding movement and musical interest to what would otherwise be merely static sounds. Being able to control the amplitude of signals throughout a patch is therefore essential, and one can never have too many voltage-controlled amplifiers. Designed as a fully featured modulation hub for Eurorack synthesizers, Morph 4 takes the basic concept of the multi-VCA module to the next level. At the core, this is 4 VCAs, where channels A through D have inputs, outputs, and level controls. We can use them independently, like 4 VCAs for audio or CV, and we can use them independently and mixing, and the outputs here don't affect the mix section. But Morph 4 is really about morphing. When no level input is present on the VCAs, the morph control is regulating and morphing voltages across these VCAs to control their levels. The idea of morphing works on this idea of positions, and let's consider a right and a left position. If every channel was set to be all the way left, when I morph across to the left hand side, you can see there I'm morphing across to them all being on. If I say shift channels C and D, I'll shift from A and B being active on the left through to C and D being active on the right. And we can place these anywhere and morph through which ones are actually on or off. Shifting them all to the left. With all the positions to the left, we'll move on to the span control, which really is how much potential morph space they occupy. If I say make A and B have a big, wide, full span, and barely any span on C and D, you'll see A and B fade over time, and C and D are only active right when I'm morphing to that specific position. We can modulate the actual morphing with the morph mod input and attenuverter. We have CV inputs for the level, position and span on all channels. And we have a mix section, summed outputs for channels A and B and C and D. We have an add output, which is our main output, which will add up all the voltages, audio modulation, whatever that is, together. And an average output, which has a -12 dB weighting. If you were, say, mixing 4 audio signals and you didn't want the levels just to stack up way too high. We also have half-wave rectifying min and max outputs that will look for the minimum voltage present across all inputs or the maximum voltage present across all inputs. There's lots of ways to use this, so use the timing index that's on screen, skip around, get a feel for the module, try out some of the patches. This really is the dimensional modulation array for a Eurorack system to control audio and CV in a ton of different ways, used as a panner, a comparator, VCAs, mixers, logic, summed outputs and subgroups. a routing system to go around a whole modular case. Without further ado, let's dive in. So in this patch, I'm going to morph through 4 different modulations of this filter. An envelope, which is the green trace on channel A, a step sequence, the blue trace on B, pink trace there, triangle LFO on channel C, and an audio rate source on D. So if I wanted to modulate my envelope most of the time, have a position for some audio rate and LFO together, just a little bit of the time, and say the sequence all the way around to the other side, I can now morph through complex shifts through these 4 signals. If I plug in, let's say an LFO to this, here's a really quick, simple patch to show that A and B and C and D outputs can simply be used as a submix. A and B is a kick and snare, kick on B, snare on A. That's going into some compression, so it's useful to take that out as a submix. And then C and D, hi-hats on C and a nice oscillating, filter modulated kind of bass line on D. I'm modulating with a rising envelope to create a fake sidechain compression. You can feel that kind of push and pull. Here I'm building stereo modulation using the min and max outputs. Max is blue on the top there, min is green, to modulate a stereo filter with the same sound on both sides. And before I modulate or do anything on Morph 4, simply mixing 4 bipolar modulation sources and taking the logic min and logic max to modulate a left and a right signal is certainly interesting and complex enough, as these are all just completely free-running, differing looping envelopes and LFOs. And we certainly get a really complex modulation. Min-max logic in those 4 free-running bipolar modulations, morphing through them and changing their positions and span. You can see there's a lot of activity. So here's Morph 4 as a rather standard quad VCA. 4 inputs, 4 external modulations, and I'm mixing them together on the added output. Sub-square wave, a triangle tuned to my root, another triangle that's higher, and some noise. And this is a simple polymetric patch where I'm using divide by 4 for the noise, divide by 5 for my root, divide by 7 for the harmony, and divide by 9 for the sub. I could use individual outputs as 4 individual VCAs, but having 4 that mix is a handy thing to have around. So here I'm using Morph 4 as a panner, and a panner where I can control the pan law or the response of the panning across 2 channels. You can see and hopefully hear, certainly grab some headphones if you can, this panning and shifting between outputs A and B, which I'm treating as hard left and right signals. A single input, which is my whole patch, some modal synthesis, filtered samples, and some low-end kind of sub-bass, is normalizing to channel B as the inputs normalize across, so same sound into both channels, and then using Morph to pan between them with their positions set apart, and a span that I find pleasing. Now, I could make much lower spans, and we'd have a lot of silence between the sides. But with a nice span that overlaps, we certainly get some nice panning, morphing between the levels on A and B, and therefore our left and right outputs. So here's the Waveshaper patch from the manual, and this is a really interesting and compelling way to draw and create your own waveforms. The pink trace on here, the rising ramp wave, is what's going into morph, and it's an audio rate source. This could be CV as well, and then you'd be drawing customizable, custom, unique CV modulations. But with the ramp driving the morph, you can see it's scanning through these A and B peaks, which are positive because of the normalized plus 5 volts. And to get bipolar audio, I'm using -5 on C and D, so we have 2 positive and 2 negative sections. Then at the main output they're giving me this bipolar audio. If I shift positions around, this ramp wave scanning will start to affect the waveform. We can shift these A and B positive peaks around, maybe make them thinner. Or wider. Maybe span out some of the negative voltages. So here's a patch using all 4 channels on Morph 4 in series, and because the inputs normalize, the input to B will be the input to A, for example, and not the outputs, I'm patching across output to input, where my main audio in comes into A, and then the out of A feeds the in of B, out of B feeds the in of C, out of C feeds the in of D, and D there is my final output. I've got 4 lots of modulation in series as these are going through each other, starting with audio rate modulation for AM synthesis, an envelope, some stepped random for differing velocities, and an on and off muting style signal, which is just a square wave LFO, 8 notes on, 8 notes off. So this patch looks at using a single channel that will pass through all the time and others that will morph, so we can have a pass through and some morphing on top. Now I've got a rather wonky beat, some timing offsets to try and create some groove, and here's the final thing. So here we're looking at hard switching between sources as opposed to smoothly morphing through them, and also injecting some silence into what's going on. Now if we didn't like the mixture, because one of these random step voltages may land on a blend of A and B or B and C or so on, we could take down the span and reduce the overlap between the channels. And if we wanted to inject some silence, we could take that span right down, and lots of the potential morphing space is now empty. My output here is entirely open in terms of the rest of the patch, it's not been cut on and off. So here I'm looking at Morph 4 as if it's a custom kind of filter bank. I've got 4 different filters with a high-passed wasp, a rather raspy gristleizer filter, a low-pass filter from LA67, and a distorted tube bandpass. Now, if I start to morph through these, it's like scanning through my own custom bank of filters. Not quite a filter bank, but we can think of it like that. Adding more span. These will overlap and give us a smoother morphing between these four filtered sounds. So here we're looking at creating unique triangle-based modulation. I'm using the add output, which will mix all of these together, but I'm visualizing all four channels here on data. This is an LFO, in this case contour looping. And it's scanning through the channels, and we can see A green, B blue, C pink, and yellow is channel D. And that's simply modulating the cutoff on a filter. So again, unique modulation. Now leaving this as is and ramping up contour to audio rates, we'll hear this as a unique oscillator. It's still going to be modulating the filter. So here we're looking at half-wave rectification, which occurs on the min, minimum, and max outputs. The max output won't let negative voltages pass through, and that's half-wave rectification. If I pull these and look at the green trace, we can see a rising positive voltage that holds, blocking out negative voltages. Adding this envelope here, you can see it then starts to follow the maximum voltage. Adding some steps random and morphing across. Going back to mainly just the LFO. The onboard voltage is useful on the first input, as I can offset that split point in this voltage by biasing or offsetting this voltage across, which is higher, therefore the maximum, higher than the other inputs. So here Morph 4 is acting as a unique pseudo filter, a fake filter, if you will. Let's make a nice tighter envelope there. Wider span. You can hear that effect of it being like a release stage on an envelope. Playing around with morphing, positions. It's going to change how this scans through. To play around with fake filtering and pretending to be filters, with the idea of going from simpler, less complex waves with less harmonics through richer ones and to silence, giving us this sound. As a little bonus, min and max here taken out and panned at hard left and right, so grab a pair of headphones. And you can hear how half-wave rectifying and taking these as stereo gives some really interesting effects, certainly in headphones. So here's an interesting patch from the manual showing us how to use Morph 4 as a quad comparator. Now, if you want to use comparators, and there's lots of ways to use them, I highly suggest watching my Compare 2 video, which I'll link in the description. Sticking with just channel D there, so just yellow and blue traces, the The span is going to give me the window, how wide that comparator is. The position sets the position within this morph signal, and the span, how wide of a window that is. So wide span is giving us this yellow output which drives this contour 1 longer. You can see a longer held sustained signal from contour 1 there. Now a small window, which is just closing that span in, will give us a much tighter output. Now comparators would give us gates or triggers when voltages go within their thresholds, within that window that we're talking about. This is giving us a rising and falling voltage, but it's driving my envelopes here just fine. Plugging in B again. Let's go for a big span on B. So that's it for this video on Morph 4, and I hope that's shown you what a compelling and interesting module this is for both audio or CV. Do check out other Joranalogue demos linked in the description. You can join my amazing growing community at patreon.com/DivKid and get in the Discord channel. Hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, all the usual stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye.